We're going to delve deeper into the media story in Turkey now with someone who's got a lot riding on it. Can Dündar, the editor-in-chief of Cumhuriyet, which after the takeover of Zaman is now the biggest opposition newspaper in the country. 10 months ago, Dundar published that story about Turkish intelligence trucks allegedly carrying weapons to rebels in Syria. President Erdogan's promise that, quote, the person who wrote this story will pay a heavy price for it. I won't let him go unpunished, sent chills across the Turkish media landscape. The specific charges that followed against Dundar and his Ankara bureau chief, Erdem Gül, included espionage, revealing classified information, and membership in a terrorist organization. The two men then spent 92 days behind bars before the Constitutional Court ruling that set them free. Another lower court will decide in a couple of weeks, March 25th, if their freedom is to last. And the president has made it clear that this case is not closed. I spoke with Can Dündar from his home in Istanbul. He spoke in Turkish. He told us he wanted to make sure that he didn't miss out on any details by speaking in English, which is a second language for him. I started out by asking him about February 26th, the day he was released after 3 months in prison.
Tabii en başta ailem vardı.
Firstly, and most importantly, my family were there, as were my colleagues and lawyers. Then there were those who fight for freedom in Turkey on a daily basis, the people who have been waiting near to the prison gates, supporting us throughout this period. The joy we shared in that moment was not only about our release, but the feeling that something good was happening in Turkey. After being held in solitary confinement for 3 months, this was a very exciting time for us.
Müthiş bize de heyecan verdi.
That story that you published in Cumhuriyet back in May of last year when you alleged that Turkish intelligence trucks were smuggling arms to rebels in Syria, do you still stand by that story? And is there anything you can add to it now that you couldn't include when you first published?
Elbette haberimin arkasındayım. Son derece de önemli.
Of course, I'm still defending my story. I wish it had never been censored. Then the public would have seen how this country is being dragged through the mud. The Turkish government has been transferring ammunition to Syria without the public knowing anything about it. In order to sweep this under the rug, the government censored the story and arrested us. This is a big cover-up, and I don't regret exposing it at all. But I would like to know where those weapons were delivered and how they were used. In the coming days, it will be our duty to investigate these angles further.
Zannediyorum önümüzdeki dönemde bize düşen biraz bunları araştırmak olacak.
Now, President Erdogan took that story personally, and he made it personal in return. He vowed that you would pay a heavy price. How much of what has followed, the charges, your imprisonment, has been a result of how the Turkish state sees the media? And how much of this, do you think, comes down to President Erdogan himself?
Bu neredeyse Erdoğan'ın kişisel bir sırrı gibi.
Erdogan treated this as though it was his personal secret that we had revealed. We exposed Turkey's involvement in the Syrian war, and that's why he was so furious. Even our 3-month prison term has not calmed him. He's still working to put us back in jail. This is important as it sends a chill to the whole journalistic community.
Dışarıda kalan gazetecilere gözdağı olması açısından önemi var.
Now, you were released after a ruling by the Constitutional Court that said that your freedom of expression had been violated, as had freedom of the press. The president responded saying he does not, quote, abide by that decision or respect it. Is there a reckoning that is looming now between the government, the courts, and the news media there?
Cumhuriyet tarihinde, Türkiye tarihinde, belki dünya tarihinde ilk kez...
This is the first time in Turkish history, maybe world history, that a president has openly declared he will not obey the decision of the Constitutional Court. According to constitutional law, this is a crime. Erdogan must follow the laws and there is no other option. Normally in democracies, presidents encourage the rule of law. But in Turkey today, it's we, the public, who had to say that Erdogan must follow these rules. The regime in Turkey has been turned upside down, and we are now struggling for our democratic rights under this authoritarian leader.
Bizim bir demokrasi mücadelesi verdiğimizi çok daha iyi anlatıyor.
There's your case. There's the closing of Cihan News Agency, IMC TV being taken off the air, what happened at Zaman. The question about this recent offensive against the news media in Turkey isn't why, Mr. Dündar. The question is, why now?
Zaman gazetesinin tam da bugün olması...
The raid on Zaman coincided with Turkey's negotiations with the EU. Europe is so deeply immersed in its migration crisis that is not paying attention to the big stick Erdogan is holding in his hand. Erdogan has leverage right now. He can threaten to open the borders if the government is criticized, and then the EU will have to deal with more refugees on European soil. That's why Erdogan has been bold enough to launch these media attacks in such a short space of time. Attacks on media will only accelerate. That's my expectation.
Dolayısıyla bu eğilim giderek tırmanacaktır gibi görüyorum.
Your story has received international attention. Zaman's story is on the pages of the New York Times, but many of the journalists imprisoned in Turkey are lesser-known Kurdish journalists reporting on the conflict in the southeast. Their legal cases receive very little, if any, coverage. And I'm wondering, what are journalists like you doing to report that story? Do you feel a sense of solidarity with them and a duty to report on their legal cases?
Kesinlikle biz ne yazık ki Türkiye'deki tutuklu
Certainly, we have become symbolic for all journalists imprisoned in Turkey. This does give us certain advantages, but it also brings responsibilities which we must fulfill. We need to be their voice. We need to tell the world that Turkey is an open prison. That's why we are going to Diyarbakir next week to show our solidarity with our colleagues reporting in the southeast. This is not just for freedom of journalists. It has consequences for everyone in the country. If we win, everybody will be freed, not just journalists.
Sadece gazeteciler değil, hepimiz özgür olacağız.
How much support have you received, Mr. Dündar, from the rest of the Turkish media, or have they been scared silent on this story?
Maalesef açıkçası Avrupa...
Unfortunately, I have received much more support from European media than Turkish media. I can partly understand this. There is immense pressure. Some of the journalists who would normally criticize this case are already behind bars, while others are unemployed. In the last 2-3 years, the pressure has become unbearable. In this environment, it's a pipe dream to expect a good level of support. In spite of this, my colleagues have supported us as much as they can. But I must reiterate one point. This is a struggle for democracy, and as soon as we break through this barrier of fear, people will learn to write freely once again.
Sıfırdan korkusuz yazıp çizmeyi en baştan öğrenmeye başlayacaklar.
Given all that's happening, and with your criminal court hearing coming up on March 25th, has anyone advised you to, despite the travel ban, get out of Turkey while you still can?
Elbette bunu çok söyleyenler oluyor. Çünkü
Of course, so many people have said this to me. The common belief here in Turkey is that if the president files a case against you, there is no way you can escape a prison term. I reject these beliefs. We are not criminals. This government may want us to leave the country, but I would prefer to be in prison. Showing bravery, standing tall against all these pressures actually creates more trouble for Erdogan. This is something I realized after my recent arrest. I will go to jail before leaving this country.
tutuklanmayı tercih ederim ülkeyi terk etmektense.
Can Dündar of Cumhuriyet, thanks for speaking to us at the Listening Post today. We hope to do this again sometime soon.
Çok teşekkürler.